And welcome into KRK.com and Fox16.com. As you know, we've been talking with the Board of Director candidates, and we have really tried to create an opportunity for you to meet all of the candidates. And I want to get right to the next person that we're talking with today. Tell me a little bit about who you are and introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is Russ Racop. I'm an activist and blogger here in Little Rock. But before I retired, I held positions with the Department of Human Services and at two large regional financial institutions. I was actually born here in Little Rock and graduated from Parkview High School and the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. My father is a retired Methodist minister, and my mother is a retired teacher from the Little Rock School District. I've got two grown sons and two daughters that attend public schools here in Little Rock. And I'm running for the position of city director to hold the board and the mayor accountable and provide the citizens of Little Rock with the representation they deserve.
So, and let's not waste any time, Russ. Let's just jump right into these questions. Crime is a known issue in this city for years. What is your opinion on the relationship between the Little Rock Police Department and the community? What ideas do you have to improve community policing, and how should the crime rate be addressed?
Well, we don't have and cannot have community policing in our city with the majority of the police officers refusing to live here in Little Rock. Almost 70% of all Little Rock police officers live outside the city. 80% of the white officers refuse to live in the city limits of Little Rock and call this their home. That plays into the extremely high violent crime rate, almost 3 times higher than the national average. When officers are not connected to the community as residents and neighbors, it says a lot to the citizens. Instead of take-home police vehicles being parked at night at homes in Little Rock neighborhoods, they are parked at homes in Benton, Bryant, Cabot, Conway, and even Malvern. To improve community policing, and actually to have community policing, we need a residency requirement for all LRPD officers. We need real cultural diversity and empathy training for these mercenary officers that live in predominantly white communities. To reduce the crime rate, we have to provide intervention, alternatives, and economic opportunities to underserved areas of our city. We need to look at the budget of the police department and see how that money can best be used to benefit the citizens. We need to create a city economic development department and stop funding the Little Rock Regional Chamber of Commerce. There's no easy solution to crime, but the current mayor and the board refuse to talk about it. We've just had the 55th homicide of the year here in Little Rock this week, and we have to admit that we have a problem with crime and talk about that crime problem before we can come up with plans to address it.
So, I want to stick with the Little Rock Police Department, if you don't mind. There is an apparent discord within the Little Rock Police Department. The police chief is facing multiple lawsuits from current and former city employees. The police chief, in his individual capacity, is suing Little Rock employees over civil rights violations. Probably worth pointing out, he's also suing you. How do you plan on addressing these apparent issues within the city's police department? And quite honestly, can you, if you're sitting on the board?
Yeah. Well, as a journalist and activist, I probably have a better insight into the systematic problems at Little Rock Police from my obtaining thousands of records from them over the last several years and exposing corruption at LRPD more than any other candidate for the board. Mitch, I don't believe that the problems that LRPD has and has had for decades can be fixed. We have to realize that we have to disband the Little Rock Police Department and form a Metropolitan Police Department with the county under the leadership of Sheriff Eric Higgins. The city has failed its citizens with the selection of the current and former police chief. Both have had issues with transparency. I had to sue the former chief to obtain public records, and I have 4 active lawsuits against the chief to obtain public records. And there's more of those lawsuits that'll be filed in the coming weeks. honestly, the mayor needs to fire the current chief, and until we can explore the Metropolitan Police Force option, let one of the remaining assistant chiefs take command.
Just to
It's not easy to
clarify,
do.
you're talking about dismantling the Little Rock Police Department and making a Metropolitan Police Department.
Metropolitan Police Department, much like they have in Nashville. You know, we have a Metropolitan Emergency Management Ambulance Service. The same thing has happened with the water department. It's become a regional type water department. And everything south of the river at some point in time is going to become Little Rock. That's Pulaski County. You know, the city has nowhere to grow but out into the county. And, you know, we already have the extraterritorial provisions where if there are developments outside of the city, they have to meet code requirements of the city because we expect, or they're annexed into the city to become neighborhoods and things like that. Okay. So that's just something that we have to do. The problems there, you know, they settled a lawsuit with officers not too long ago. I think it was $200,000 they had to pay these officers. It was a symbolic payment. They weren't in it for the money. And there are just too many problems at the police department for it to be fixed. And the only alternative we have, and we have a sheriff's department that has good officers, good leadership, and not nearly the problems that LRPD has experienced.
So let's move away from the police department. Let's talk about city government, city infrastructure. The board's at-large positions have always been a hot topic. Do you believe the board needs to be restructured?
Oh, certainly. We've got an autocratic mayor that tries to micromanage the city board. By law, it's the city board of directors that constitutes the supreme legislative and executive body of the city. They need to hold the mayor accountable for his actions or lack of action. The mayor often does not include board members in most of his decision and simply asks them to show up at press conferences where they learn, just like we do, what is about to be revealed. That happened last week about the revitalization on Astor Avenue. The ward director for that area was not involved in discussions, but was asked to stand with the mayor at one of the pressers. And by the way, he didn't. Folks know I won't stand by and let that happen if I'm elected, and I will stay on the mayor to include the board members on the front end and at the end of discussions. Now, the part about the government, what I'd like to do is my first order of business would be to sponsor an ordinance that would establish a more democratic form of city government by eliminating the at-large positions and going to a mayor-council form of government, with all city directors elected from wards. That ordinance will empower the citizens of Little Rock to vote on that change in our form of government. At-large seats are more expensive to seek, and thus the business community generally controls those elections, and the winners tend to be white. Only 3 of the 10 current board members are people of color in a city where the majority of the population is now people of color. The current black board members have never been able to get an ordinance passed. People need to realize that. These black directors have never been able to get an ordinance they put forth passed. We have to end this racial division on the city board.
So moving to the next question here, and some board members have been vocal in recent months about a disconnect between the mayor's office and some members of the board. How do you plan on working with the executive office? Also worth noting, you've sued the executive office, but so how do you plan on working with the executive office but still hold executive leadership accountable?
Well, and I covered some of that in a previous answer. Mm-hmm. It's long been known that the mayor is exercising the change in the city government that was voted on and passed back when Stodola was mayor, although he didn't ever enact that. He just basically stayed a part-time mayor and let the city manager run. Now we've got a mayor who's using that change in the law and takes more control. But he also has to understand, like I said, the city board are elected individuals that control the legislative and office and financial parts of the city. And he has to talk to them and run things by them and get their input. Because what happens is the mayor says something, and then you have the city directors who get phone calls and emails from constituents, and they don't have a clue what's going on, and it makes them look out of touch. And why they're not doing more to make the mayor be have them involved in what happens in the city, that's beyond me. But folks know that I'm not like that, and I'll hold the mayor accountable, and if I have to, I'll ask him what's going on, because you can't expect things to happen in the city if the people aren't behind it and the people aren't involved. If they feel like somebody's trying to pull something over them or bamboozle them, you're less likely to be successful. And you just have to stay on folks like the mayor and constantly prod him to provide information and to bring the board into those discussions.
Let's talk about neighborhoods, Russ. Some would say the city's taken a significant effort to revitalize neighborhoods. Others would disagree. How would you further efforts to revitalize neighborhoods?
Well, whoever says they're trying to revitalize neighborhoods has got to be smoking something. In fact, the board recently tabled an ordinance that was changed into a resolution that specifically dealt with that topic. Its purpose was to support a targeted community development initiative to address the lack of development in strategic sections of the city. And the sections of the city we're talking about are those east of I-30 and south of I-630. In fact, the area of town, my Ward 6, was one of those areas that was targeted in that. And what they're really talking about with this neighborhood stuff is gentrification. It happened on Main Street, and then in the East End area, which the white developers are rebranding as East Village, much to the dismay of the community. Again, we have to focus our immediate attention on the areas east of I-30 and south of 630. If you go into these areas and visit with folks, you'll hear about the lack of city services, especially garbage pickup, waste pickup, and contact from or with their elected representatives, especially the white at-large board members. Now, what I'll do to help revitalize these areas is see that we have discussions about these blighted areas that are been ignored for decades, and see if we can't direct economic equality to those areas.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that really opens up to my next question, Russ. People have for years voiced concerns about a racial divide in this city, specifically using Interstate 630 as a reference between poor neighborhoods, middle-class neighborhoods, and upper-class neighborhoods. What part will you have to help unite the city?
Well, there's a great tool that folks, if they don't believe that there is an economic divide, there's a great tool on the internet. You just need to Google Casey Family Foundation, and they have an economic map. And you can pull up a Little Rock, and you can circle an area, and it will give you a lot of data about that area. And I've done that on 630, like around the 12th Street area, and then right north of it. And you'll see the disparity in those areas as far as household composition, income, education. It brings it all to point. And if I'm elected, I'll continue to do the work I do as an activist and strive to bring attention to the concerns of citizens south of I-630 and east of I-30. And folks north of I-630 need to have an understanding of the real problems that their neighbors to the south have, and be willing to put resources forward to bring economic equality to that area of the city.
Russ, if elected, what will you do to improve the quality of life for every citizen?
Well, to improve the quality of life for all citizens in the city, we need to address the issues of crime and economic equality. I will bring those discussions to the board of directors and make sure real discussions occur. That is the only way we're going to be able to bring improvement to the quality of life for citizens. We can build all new parks, we can have entertainment districts, but until we deal with the crime, the homicides, the assaults, and these economic blighted areas of the town, there's only going to be a quality of life for some citizens.
So I don't think it's any secret we're in the middle of a global health pandemic. If elected, Your term would consist of rebuilding the city's economy after this COVID-19 pandemic. Many businesses have been forced to close. What kind of experience do you have to ensure Little Rock not only bounces back, but grows to a new height?
Well, and this is funny because they've had these questions in different forums where they ask about experience and things like that. The only requirements to be a city director in Little Rock is that you're 21 years of age, you live in the city and are a registered voter, and you get the signatures of 50 qualified electors on a petition so that you can run for office. No individual can ensure Little Rock bounces back and grows to new heights. And if they tell you that, they're lying. How can we attract new residents to the city if we can't convince our own police officers to live here? How can we attract new businesses if we can't to locate here with our crime rate and with our public school mess that we have? These are problems that need discussion and input from citizens and consultants. And that is how we are going to grow the city and keep more businesses from closing and failing.
Well, I'd like to stick with this the financial stuff, just because we know that in recent years the city announced a financial struggle. The city was forced into layoffs, park closures. If elected, how will you ensure the city avoids future layoffs and other closures?
Well, what we have to do in the city is we have to explore our sources of revenue. One example is the parking lot at War Memorial Stadium. Those lots are owned by the city, but the city doesn't receive a dime of any game day parking revenue and from any weekday parking. And all you have to do is drive. If you drove right down to War Memorial Stadium today, you would see that the parking lot around the stadium is jam-packed full of vehicles. We should set up a parking lot there and collect parking like we do downtown. The city also has to explore the parking fines. A couple of years ago, I covered the parking fines like some of the other media did. And I put out the top 5 or 10 offenders. And I was able to actually get one of those offenders to pay over $10,000 in fines to the city. And of course, the city never thanked me for that, but I did it anyway. And I think we have to enforce these. If you drive around the city, you'll see, especially right now, everybody's got these bow flags. They're the tall, thin flags. There's a city ordinance against that. There's fines for that, but the fines are minimal. And the same way, if people put snipe signs on utility poles, those are illegal. The city doesn't fine those individuals, and those are all and I realize those are kind of negative things, but we have an ordinance that prohibits those, and if we're not going to enforce it, then we need to repeal it. But those are revenue sources for the city that they don't explore, and I know that there's others that we need to deal with. My opponent was instrumental in forgiving nearly $1 million in unpaid rent for the deck at 6th and Scott that the city gave away to the Downtown Partnership. And it was the Downtown Partnership that owed that money. And those are people that have donated through the Political Action Committee to the city. And they've given that Political Action Committee that's funded by the chamber has given money to every sitting director, including the mayor, except for Irma Hendricks. And that's why a lot of things don't get done in the city, is because they're in the pockets of the white businessmen, and they're the ones who pull the strings. And these are just marionettes or puppets out there. So we have to look at all these avenues of increasing the sales tax revenue from these businesses. The police department, just today, they had a list out there of businesses that have applied for ABC for alcohol permits. And instead of them wanting to promote that, they tell you, if you've got concerns or object, here's who you can call and complain about. But that tax revenue from that alcohol sales goes to fund the police department. It funds their take-home cars. It funds other programs. So, we can't be hypocritical in these areas of this financial issues. We have to look at it and develop these sources of revenue that already exist out there that we're just not using.
Russ, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it very much.
All right, and just a reminder, Election Day is November 3rd. KRK and Fox 16, we are your local election headquarters. And of course, stay with us at krk.com and fox16.com leading up to Election Day. And of course, count on coverage right here on Election Day itself. Take care. Have a good day.